to the foreign investors and of course also domestic investors. This year, MIDA's input on the government support for SMEs in manufacturing sector during COVID-19 will also be added to MIDA's sharing. First, we will have Mr. Siva, the Executive Director of Investment Promotion, on Malaysia remains steadfast to accelerate quality investments in 2021. And he will be followed by Ms. Masni, the Director of Strategic Planning Division, Manufacturing, on the government support for SMEs in manufacturing sector during COVID-19. All right, together they will share with us for the next 30 minutes. After that, we'll have a short break before we start the second part of this Outlook event. All right, during the presentations, ladies and gentlemen, kindly keep your camera and mic off. And for the Q&A, we would like to recommend you to stay after the total program. Later on, we will have breakout rooms available, also for MIDA. So if you have individual questions that you want to share with them in a smaller group, you can discuss that later in the breakout room towards the end of this event. And of course, you may also already use the chat for any comments that you might have. All right, my good friend Siva, you've had a couple of stints in Europe, also responsible for attracting investments from the Netherlands. We've had a great partnership in that. Very pleased to have you, and honored to have you here with us today. And over to you, please, for your first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. First and foremost, thank you so much for inviting MIDA to participate in this, what you call a forum. Yeah. So let me go straight to the presentation. Let me share my slides. Okay. So let me, okay, now this is the content outline of my presentation. So it consists of two components. The first is actually, I would like to highlight some of the investment figures which was actually released by UNCTAD recently. This is the FDI inflows for 2020. Vis-a-vis, what are the efforts undertaken by MIDA to attract investments into Malaysia? So that will be the first part. The second part is actually with regards to one of the major initiatives that currently we are working on. That is the one-stop center to welcome business travelers during this pandemic. Yeah. So let me go through the first section of the presentation.
Siva, may I interrupt for a moment, please? Because we don't see your slides on the screen yet.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Okay.
It looks like it's still loading, or can one of your colleagues help you, please?
Yeah, yeah. Can you do something? Not PDF. Just give me a second.
Sure. There we go. All right.
All right. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
So as you can see, these figures, I would say it's quite, everybody has seen this figure. So as you can see, there is a decline of net, what you call global FDI inflows of 42% last year, from 1.5 trillion to 859 billion. And of course, the drop is quite high in the developing economy. It's about close to 70%. And of course, Malaysia declined by 68%, followed by Thailand 50%, and we have Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Now, what is important for us to understand is that these are what we call balance of payment figures, BOP figures. Yeah, this is actual inflow of funds into the economy, yeah, into the direct investments in Malaysia. In other words, the normal terminology that being used is what we call net foreign direct investment, net FDI. So the question is, what is this net FDI? Yeah. Can you go to next? Okay. So you see, in order for us to understand what is net FDI, let's look at what is gross FDI. Gross FDI actually refers to the total inflow of funds, received by direct investments or enterprise in Malaysia. Okay, this would be in the form of equity capital, reinvestment, reinvested earnings, loan transaction, trade credits, as well as other capital receipts. So this is the gross FDI inflows into the economy. And net actually refers to the FDI flows after the deduction of outflows of funds. Here we are referring to more, in the case of Malaysia, is repatriation of profits. This is, which also would include liquidation of investment, loan transaction, trade credits, and other capital payments. So as far as MIDA is concerned, we also are looking at the gross FDI inflows into Malaysia. If gross FDI inflows decline, tremendously, let's say, then that would be a major concern. So when you look at these figures, here where you can see the total gross FDI over the last couple of years. So it was at the peak in 2017, 156.98 billion. It declined somewhat to 143.5 billion in 2018. And then, of course, close to 140 billion in 2019. And of course, for the first 9 months of last year, the investment figure is 108.2 billion ringgit Malaysia. Of course, we have to wait for the full year figure to see whether it will match the figure that we received in 2019. The slight decline in the gross FDI inflows, I would say, is understandable, basically because of COVID, where we have so many projects that we approved in the year 2019, maybe at the various stages of implementation in 2020. And also there are many projects that are having difficulties to start, basically because of the closure of the borders as well. So the gross FDI, if you were to see from the slide, it is very high. However, the net FDI for the year 2020 is quite low. And the reason for that, as I mentioned just now, is because of the repatriation of profit as well as retained earnings. In most cases, is actually back to the headquarters. Now, if you were to look at this figure, you will find that in the year 2009, the figure in 2020 actually mirrors exactly the figures in 2009. What happened in 2009 was the prime, financial crisis in the US. And because of the subprime crisis, you find that many of the MNCs in Malaysia, exceptionally, they were actually repatriating very large amount of profit and income generated back to headquarters to assist, of course, to help the financial difficulties faced by these companies. So from the Bank Negara data, we can see some of the figures why the outflow is very high for 2020. Now, coming to our efforts to attract investments, MIDA, our aim is actually we need to ensure whether is there interest from companies to invest in Malaysia. And that can only be seen from the projects that MIDA approves. Now, this shows the trend of total investment that we approve over a period of more than 10 years. And if you were to look at 2016-17, it is more or less about 200 billion ringgit Malaysia that we approve. This is total investment in the economy. For the period January to September, we approved close to 110 billion. This is the total investment. Can we hit 200 billion for 2020? I'm not very sure. We have to wait until the first week of March for us to see the full figure. However, this is actually the breakdown of investment in the manufacturing sector. This is very important because bulk of the investment, foreign direct investment in Malaysia, is actually in the manufacturing sector. So we had about 87 billion in 2018, 83 billion in 2019, and of course 65.3 billion total investment for the first 9 months. And FDI, if we were to compare January to September 2019, there was an increase of 3.2%. And we feel quite confident when we release the full year figure, the total investment figure for the manufacturing sector would be, if not higher, would hit the 83 billion that we have approved last year. And of course, the FDI also will be much higher because we know the investment project that we have approved to date. And these are some of the high-tech projects that we have approved last year. Now, another point that generally the business community want to know is that, okay, fair enough, we have approved all these projects. Has these projects been implemented? based on our monitoring of all these projects, close to 80 to 82% of these projects are implemented. Yeah, so you approve in 2019, it get implemented in 2020, in some cases maybe 2020-21. Yeah, so that is the average percentage of projects implemented. So this will then translate into the gross FDI flows that I mentioned just now. Yeah, so this is very important for us. Yeah. So moving forward for 2021, yeah, how would be the outlook look like? Now, in our approach to attract investments, we are very, very, I would say maybe more scientific. We want to know exactly the number of projects that we have currently. So we have about close to 240 high-profile leads that we are now negotiating with. Yeah, the total investment is close to 90 billion ringgit Malaysia. What does that mean? That means these are the projects that we have to bring in the year 2021. At the same time, we have also received close to 50 billion worth of investments, which we are now evaluating, which need to be approved in the coming weeks and months. Yeah. So now we are talking about February. These figures are only up to February. So moving forward, there will be more projects that will be coming in, which we need to actually to secure and get it approved by year end. Yeah? So we are quite optimistic. No doubt, it will be a very challenge for us, given the COVID pandemic. Yeah? Now, the second part of my presentation is with regards to one of the major initiatives that being undertaken by the government of Malaysia to welcome business travelers to enter while the borders is still closed for people to come in. Yeah. So, one of the measures that was decided by the Economic Action Council was that looking at the global FDI inflows, which is very challenging, looking at the investment projects that we have already approved way back in 2018 and 19, yet there are some projects which are not being able to actually be implemented because of the border closure, and also those projects that we approved last year, yeah, and they need to get those projects implemented this year. So how do you go about doing that? And what about those new projects that you're working on now? All these leads, how do you convince these companies to come in? You know, if they're not able to come in and look at the various locations in Malaysia, yeah, and also those projects that you already received, which we need to approve, yeah. And of course, there's another major issue that faced by the government of Malaysia is the high unemployment rate, yeah. Today we have close to 800,000 people which are unemployed, yeah. So to address this issue, the decision by the government of Malaysia was that to set up a one-stop center, yeah, to allow for long-term business travelers as well as short-term business travelers to come in. The long-term business travel is nothing new. It is being done currently, yeah, which follows the Ministry of Health requirements, yeah. But the short-term business travelers is the most important component of this whole exercise. This is where business travelers are able to come in to stay, let's say, less than 14 days, and they can be exempted from mandatory quarantine, yeah. So how do we go about doing that? That means we want the business travelers to undertake a COVID test before they depart from their home country. Once they arrive at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, they will be undertaking another COVID test, whereby the result will be known within 2 to 3 hours. And then after they finish their itinerary in Malaysia, when they depart, then they have to do the third COVID test. And during their period here, there will be a liaison officer who will be following the business travelers throughout the program. Yeah. So that is actually, in a nutshell, how we're going to handle the entry of short-term business travelers. So the question is, who are these short-term business travelers? We are looking at potential investors, those leads that I'm talking about, as well as those applications that we have received. We are looking at existing investors already here. For example, like Bersih Airpack, they are here, but their chairman, their board members would like to visit for a few days. Also, those technical experts who wants to come in just for a few days, as well as business customers. This is also very important. Why? Companies in Malaysia, for example, they are producing products for their customers. We want their customers to come here to verify their products. Yeah. So currently, the long-term stay, almost the first component in blue is already ongoing. What we are looking at is a short-term stay as well as those long-term stay under the My Travel Pass system. Yeah. But the one-stop center committee, this is actually the three components of the one-stop center. The one-stop committee is already in operation. Yeah. whereby we have the approval is already been granted by the committee, and we also are looking at the short-term business travelers system. Yeah? So we are working on the system. The second is actually the establishment of Business Travelers Center at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. This would include a dedicated COVID lab, business launch for business travelers. This is more for short-term business travelers. And finally, we are looking at a website. We already designed the website, a dedicated microsite for business travelers, long-term, short-term, to go in to submit the application. Yeah. So as at 2nd October, the OSC committee is already in place. We have approved almost 6,000 long-term business travelers to come in. Long-term business travelers have to go through the quarantine requirement. The short-term, we have approved about 48 applications. Yeah. And this is how the Business Traveler Center will look like at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. This is just the artist impression, as you can see. So we have a registration, we have the business launch. Yeah. So the business travelers will be there at most maybe 2 to 3 hours. Yeah, for them to know the business, what you call the COVID test result. And this is actually the one-stop center website. Yeah. So this website is very dedicated. It covers long-term as well as short-term. So behind the scene, all the system is actually linked to immigration website. Yeah. So all the SOP, all the requirements, all the payment that need to be done for the Business Travel Center, all this will be done through this dedicated website. Yeah. So we hope that with this BTC, which will be overall will be ready by end of this month. That is our target. Yeah. So by first week of March, short-term business travelers can make use of the BTC that we're going to set up at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Yeah. So Marco, so with that, I think I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Siva. And yes, the business community very much values MIDA's initiative on this one-stop center, or the BTC. Many companies, the ambassador and I also had an online discussion this morning with some of our top companies from Penang. Many companies are very eager to get their technical colleagues in from overseas to get production lines starting again, to install new machines that they have purchased from Europe, to bring the latest technology into Malaysia, to train Malaysians as well to take over as soon as possible. And that would really spur the production in the country again. So thank you for those initiatives, and we really hope that current circumstances still allow to get fast and plenty of approvals for any applications. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, then we would like to move to Ms. Masni Mohammed, the Director of Strategic Planning Division Manufacturing, who will support with her talk on the governance support for SMEs in manufacturing sector during COVID-19. Masni, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, again, thank you for providing this opportunity for us to share some of the incentive initiatives as well as programs that has been announced by the government to assist our industry to rebound and recover during these very challenging times. So the coverage of my presentation today, first I will look at the overview of our investment incentive mechanism. Before I will, can you see my slides?
No, not yet. It's
indeed okay, all right.
Still the same as just now. If you can do the same as just now, what happened to Mr. Siva's slide? Yes, there we are. Okay,
all right.
Full screen, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Excellent.
So first, I will provide an overview of our investment incentives mechanism before zooming into specific incentives available. And then followed by initiative under Penjana, our National Economic Recovery Program, as well. And lastly will be the initiative under Budget 2021. Okay, these are the two main legislation that give us the provision to give tax incentives to our investors. The first one is our Promotion of Investment Act 1986. in this act, we have a list of promoted products, promoted activities that we line up for tax incentive. So you can check this list. We have a long list of promoted products and its activities. You can check it out on our website, MIDA website. And of course, we do review this list regularly to make sure that the promoted products, promoted activities that we give incentive will be in line with our investment agenda, as well in line with our various industrial master plan. The other legislation is the Income Tax 1967. This is where we give specific incentives, special incentive under a specific gazette order, as well as under a specific approval from the Ministry of Finance. Usually this incentive that's given under this act will be very special, and it is usually given on merits of each investment project. Okay, so that's the overall mechanism that we have to provide incentives to our investors. Okay, and then the major incentive that we usually give start with pioneer status and investment tax allowance. I think some of you are already aware. Pioneer status and investment tax allowance are mutually exclusive. Pioneer status is basically a tax holiday, which is actually income tax exemption ranging from 70% or 100% of your statutory income, which is given for a period of 5 years or 10 years. Alternatively, usually for high capital intensive project, investor will usually choose investment tax allowance, which is actually an allowance of on your qualifying capital expenditure that you incur within 5 years. So once that you have finished up all these pioneer status or investment tax allowance, if you continue to invest and reinvest in Malaysia, you are eligible to enjoy this reinvestment allowance, which is also an allowance of 60% for 15 consecutive years. So actually, if you continue to invest in Malaysia, the minimum years that you will be able to enjoy incentive is actually 15 years. Investment tax allowance 5 years, reinvestment allowance another 15 years. So all in all, it's actually 20 years. So on top of that, those manufacturers importing raw materials, components, machinery, and equipment for their operation can be considered for import duty exemptions, provided that the items are not available locally. So these are the major incentives that we usually offer to our investor. On top of that, we have specific incentive which we come up with to encourage or facilitate a certain agenda. For example, automation capital allowance is actually meant to expedite the process of automation in our industry. As you're aware, some of our SMEs, Malaysian companies, even some of our investors, foreign investors, rely on unskilled workers, foreign workers. So this is one of our initiatives to improve that situation. And then we have also grants, Domestic Investment Strategic Fund, Industry Forward DISF, Industry Forward Integration Fund. This is actually grants provided by the government to expedite certain agenda. And I will be explaining this on the next slides. So automation capital allowance, as I've mentioned earlier, this is actually to expedite automation of our industry. It was introduced first in budget 2015. It's actually a program, a joint program between MIDA and SIRIN as our technical evaluator. We have two categories of automation capital allowance. The first one is the for labor-intensive industry, like rubber, plastic, wood, furniture products, and textile. So what we give here is an allowance of 200% for the first 4 million capital expenditure incurred from 2015 to 2023. And for category 2, for other segment of the industry, again, allowance of 200% for the first 2 million expenditure incurred from 2015 to 2023. And if you notice there, beginning 2020, this ACA is also extended to the services sector. The next one is Domestic Investment Strategic Fund. This is actually a grant given by the government of Malaysia to upscale our Malaysian companies to be part of the global value chain, to be competitive in the export market. So it's actually a matching grant of 50%, 50-50 matching grant on reimbursable basis, meaning that you have to incur first the expenditure before you can come back to MIDA for the balance of the 50%. So the expenses that we cover under the ISF is expenses for training, R&D, upgrading of your facilities, obtaining international standard and certification, as well as purchase of licenses for acquiring high technology. Industry Forward DISF is actually an extension of Domestic Investment Strategic Fund. The only different, there are two differences in this Industry Forward Domestic Investment Strategic Fund is that you must go through a readiness assessment program, whereby we have a number of assessing body who will go and visit your facility to assess where you are in terms of your IR4 journey, where you are, and they will come up with some recommendation on where you need to improve in terms of your IR4 adoption. So with that recommendation, you come and apply for the ISF fund from MIDA. And once the ratio for Industry Forward DISF is actually 60-40. Okay, the earlier, the normal DISF is only 50-50, but for Industry Forward DISF, you are given 60-40, meaning that for every 10 ringgit, 6 ringgit will be subsidized by the government and 4 ringgit will be from your own expenses. Okay. The last one is Industry Forward Intervention Fund. This is actually meant for SMEs. Again, this is for the adoption of IR4 agenda. Again, you have to go through the Industry Forward Readiness Program. Of course, the cap for this fund is much smaller, but the best part of this thing is the ratio is higher, 70-30, meaning that out of 10 ringgit, 7 ringgit will be subsidized by the government, and even more attractive, out of that 7 ringgit, 3 ringgit will be given on upfront basis. Yeah, but this is only for SMEs. Okay. All right, and then let's look into initiatives under Penjana. I'm going to share only 3 initiatives that's relevant to today's session. Of course, there are like 40 over initiatives under Penjana, but for today's session, only 3 will be highlighted. The first one is additional reinvestment allowance. Earlier, I've mentioned about the 15 years RA. So this is meant for those who have fully utilized that 15 years. Okay, so there are companies who have fully utilized these 15 years, but they still continue investing. So for those companies, this is what the government is offering. Additional reinvestment allowance from 2020 to 2022. The second one is Smart Automation Grant. This is another grant offered by the government. For 2020, we were allocated with 10 million ringgit Malaysia to implement this project. It is meant for SMEs to expedite the automation process, because earlier we only have grant for IR4. This is automation grant for SMEs. This is capped at 1 million per company, and there are a number of deliverables that needs to be met by our SMEs. The next one is special tax incentive under Penjana. This is actually the highlights for us. This is the highlights of Penjana incentive, because this is the first time the government is offering zero-rated special tax rates of 0% for up to 15 years. Okay, and earlier I've mentioned about promoted product list, promoted activity list. For this incentive, we don't have any promoted list. What we have is only a negative list, meaning that if you're not listed in those lists, meaning that you are eligible, provided that, of course, you qualify with the eligible capital expenditure of more than 300 million. The next one is Budget 2021 initiative. Again, 150 million has been allocated to MIDA and MDEC to expedite the digitalization automation of our industry. So for 2021, we have been allocated additional 50 million for our smart automation grant. And in fact, we can apply for additional budget on top of the 50 million, depending on the uptake rate by the industry. So at this point of time, we already received 30 plus application, assuming that each of those companies apply for 1 million, we're already at 30 plus million. So it looks like by March, we will need to apply for more fund from Ministry of Finance. The second one is 100 million investment fund for upgrading of basic infrastructure in IEs. For us, this is also very important because we need to make sure that our industrial estate are well maintained, well equipped, so that we'll be able to attract investors. This is some improvement of initiative announced by Penjana. Earlier, I've mentioned about tax incentive, special tax incentive for manufacturing sector. And in budget 2021, the government has extended this special tax incentive Penjana to services sector. And on top of that, they also offer or make an enhancement that for special income tax rate treatment for non-residents, for those companies that has been granted special tax incentives under Penjana. So this is limited to 5 non-resident individuals. And then they also announced incentives, special incentive for production of vaccines. Again, special tax incentives 0% to 10% for up to 10 years. Okay. And last one is improvement of our R&D incentive. As moving forward, the government is looking at industry that is driven by R&D and innovation. We have a lot of stocks of R&D findings in our university which are not being commercialized. So that is where the government is trying to encourage more commercialization of our R&D findings. And they are extending this incentive to private higher learning institutions as well. Earlier, it was only limited in public higher learning institutions. And the last but not least, I've mentioned earlier, we always review and revise our tax incentive. If it's no longer relevant to our industrial master plan, we will discontinue because some incentive comes with their sunset clause. So this incentive, which was earlier due to expire on 31st December 2020, we have made a recommendation to MOF to continue because it's still relevant in the industry. So the Ministry of Finance has been very kind enough to extend these 3 incentives, which is industrial building system components, MRO, maintenance, repair and overhaul of aerospace sector, as well as shipbuilding in ship repair until 2022. Okay, I think that's all from me. I think we'll see you again in the breakout session later on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Masni. Excellent information, a lot of information. I'm very glad that Maida will make the slides available. There were a couple of questions that came up in the chat. I will ask one at least now because it's basically a yes or no answer, I hope. The question was asked, is Industry 4 WRD intervention fund applicable for 100% foreign-owned SMEs in Malaysia? So basically yes or no.
Industry Forward Intervention Fund, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, this is only for SMEs with 60% Malaysian equity ownership.
60%. Okay, Chiu, here's your answer. All right. Well, even 100% foreign-owned SMEs in Malaysia, they employ nearly 98, 99% Malaysians, you know, sometimes even 100%. So maybe that's sometimes something that Maida would be able to revisit. All right, other questions? I would like to advise you to join the breakout session with Masni later on, because I would like to continue the program. We have a few minutes break until the second part of the Outlook event. Thank you very much, Masni. Thank you very much, Siva, for the Maida information. And yes, already 70 participants logging in that first half an hour to listen to your input. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you,
Thank you, Siva. Yeah. All right. In the meantime, in the few minutes break, we will play the welcome slides, the information about the house rules again, a couple of videos from our sponsors as well. For those of you who didn't manage to join our kickoff event last week, the 25th anniversary kickoff, we will also slot in the 2-minute MDBC history and logo launch video, which was produced by Pico, which received a very positive response last week during our event. So it's we're honored to be able to share those as well during the short break here. All right, if you need to get a cup of coffee or a toilet break, we advise you to do that now. You can also open your camera and your mic for a bit. And once the slides are going, you can talk a little bit to each other as well. And yeah, hopefully enjoy the video. Thank you. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, in the meantime, the Prime Minister has also given his speech. That was at 3:30. I'm very happy that you were all logging in to us. I'm not sure if, of course, on my side, I didn't have time to listen to the Prime Minister. If anybody can give an update on the main talking points that the Prime Minister just has done live on air, please feel free to open your camera and your microphone and update the rest of the audience. Well, it seems like everybody was only listening to us here at MDBC and listening to Maida and not to the Prime Minister. We're very honored. Thank you. All right, we'll try to find out what the Prime Minister has mentioned just now, this past half an hour, and maybe during the program we will be able to give you an update. There's also a Mentimeter poll. You see it on the screen right now. You can scan the QR code or go to menti.com 4046358. It's just one question, and that is in one word, what is your thought about 2021? All right, so just a simple word cloud. We will show you the input from all the audience after this. So go to Mentimeter 4046358 and just one word, your thought about 2021. All right, we're going to play a couple of videos right now, and we'll come back to the opening slides and the Mentimeter in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us today. The official program will start in a few minutes. And as you can see, Ambassador Aart Jacobi is all ready to get you going as the first speaker in a few minutes. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Everything we do begins with why? Because you are our reason. We're transforming lives through energy, empowering communities. Because we feel you and we fuel you. We've seen the impact of cleaner energy and social responsibility through innovation and care, with safety as a core value. So, as we progress together, weather the storms, journey through the stations in life, you can be sure of Shell. We are here to stay. Dear Malaysia, let's make the future.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start the program shortly. Here will be one more time the opening slides with the house rules, as well as the Mentimeter again. So please join our little poll, your thought on 2021. In the meantime, please take a moment to go over the house rules, especially also the part on the Chatham House Rule. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon in Asia, ASEAN, and good morning in the Netherlands. Thank you all for joining from different parts of the world. While the opening slides are continuing and you can read about the program and our speakers, let me first welcome you. My name is Marco Winter, the Executive Director of the Malaysian Dutch Business Council, welcoming our members and our guests to our first regular informative event of the year, after our fantastic 2021 kickoff to MDBC's 25th anniversary last week. Just now, we also played the MDBC history and logo launch video, which was produced by Pico, which we showed last week. Thank you to Maida for the very informative session, which we just had with Siva and Masni. Each year, Maida is our Outlook partner in providing an update on the investment climate, and this year the input on the government support for SMEs in manufacturing sector during COVID-19 was added as well. During the opening slides, you already saw the announcement on the Mentimeter poll. A few dozen of you have already joined that. Okay, here's the answers. And okay, what do we see here? It might also be interesting for the speakers later on that, yeah, hope and better are definitely the two outstanding words here that, yeah, we've called it on our side. We are cautiously positive and positively cautious for 2021, but definitely the year of the ox is supposed to be better than the year of the rat. Okay, so this is our word cloud for today. Okay, in the meantime, please take note on a few of the house rules. The Chatham House Rule applies. The information which is disclosed and presented during this webinar may be reported by those present, but the source of that information may not be explicitly or implicitly identified. We trust your understanding and following this rule. During the presentations, kindly keep your camera and mic off. After the last speaker, we will open the breakout rooms in which you can have a topic-related conversation with one of the speakers in a smaller group of audience. At that time, you are encouraged to open your camera and your microphone. Do join us for that segment as well. You can pick any breakout room you prefer, and don't be shy, of course, to start a conversation with the speaker and other audience who have selected the same topic. All right, we have a full lineup of great speakers tackling the topics on developments in the Netherlands, Malaysia, the economy, exhibitions, property, workspace, and innovation technology. Each speaker will have a maximum of 10 minutes. There will be no Q&A, but of course later you may join the breakout rooms for your questions. Later on, we will also advise you how to get into the breakout room. All right, here we go with our first speaker. His Excellency Aart Jacobi, the Ambassador of the Netherlands to Malaysia, who will speak about 2021 Outlook, the Netherlands, from crisis to elections. And I hope we can be positive about the Netherlands, Aart, but it's not that simple at the moment. So please enlighten the audience. Thank you very much for joining.
All right, Marco, I'll start right away. Good afternoon, everybody. There's in my 10 minutes, there is 4 subjects that I would like to cover briefly. First of all, the government in the Netherlands stepped down. That's very extraordinary. Why did that happen? We're going to have elections in March, so I will look forward to the elections. Then a brief observation on the state of our economy. Where are we right now? And the last, number 4, would be who are the winners and who are the losers in the current situation of pandemic and COVID-19. Now, first of all, a brief reflection on why the Dutch government stepped down, which is quite extraordinary. When our Prime Minister started his explanation, he quoted the following statement by a previous Prime Minister some 20, 30 years ago about the role of the state. And I'll translate it. The role of the state is as follows. The state restrains the overconfident, it protects the weak, it distributes the risks, and in the middle of all this hurried throng, it is a reliable guide. Now that is putting quite a high task to the government, and our Prime Minister concluded that the Dutch government had failed to live up to this, and that as a result they had to step down. What happened was that in the Netherlands, families, low-income families, can apply for a subsidy, a childcare subsidy. And many low-income families did for many years. But then at one point, the government decided to start a search for fraudsters. And if somebody filled out the application form wrong, they were qualified as fraudsters. And not only did they not get their child support, they had to pay back everything that they had received over the last 10, 15 years. And that amounted quite often to 15, 20, 30,000 euros. Over the next 7, 8 years, and we're talking about 10, 20,000 families, these families were mercilessly prosecuted by the tax office. Many of them had to sell their house, their car, so they were put into dire misery, and the courts, nothing really helped. And to make matters even worse, quite often they were identified by either foreign names or by double nationalities. So quite a shameful chapter in the Netherlands. And being confronted with this, the government said, this is our responsibility. It shouldn't have happened. So we stepped down. Now that is less drastic than it would seem because we have elections coming up. And that means that stepping down is not as dramatic as you would think. Now, let me continue then with the elections. I will not speak about the elections too long because I do realize that for our Malaysian public, many of the political parties and their names do not signify much. But if we look at the polls at present, then I'm quite willing and I dare to predict that we will see something come back of what we already have. If we look over on what I would call the right, but it's not really extreme right, but rightish, the Liberal Party, the Democrats, the Christian Democrats, together, they, according to the polls, they will get somewhere to 70, maybe 75, 80 seats, and 75 is half of 150. You need 76 to have a majority. So they are well poised to be able to form a new government. If I look more on the left, yes, there is some parties that gain and some others that will lose, but there is very little unity. And even if you put them all together, they are nowhere near 75 seats. So I don't see any other options than that we will probably get back a coalition of certainly the Liberal Democrats, Democrats 66, the Christian Democrats, and then possibly with 1 or 2 other parties. So a coalition of 4, maybe 5. 3 would be exceptional because then the 3 biggest ones would have to have 75 or more, and I doubt whether that is possible. So I think that we will see a similar government return after the elections in March, and we may also see the same Prime Minister return because his party will be the biggest during the elections, that's for sure. He's quite popular in spite of many of the crises that he had to face over the last, well, actually 10 years, because he's been Prime Minister for 10 years now. But all in all, people feel he's doing a good job, and his popularity is still quite high. All right, then let me turn to the economy. In 2020, the economy in the Netherlands dropped by 4.2%. It could have been much worse. If you look at countries surrounding us, many of them had a drop of 10% or thereabout. So 4.2 is not bad. We expect that the economy will grow in 2021 by 2.4, and in 2022 again by 2.4. And in the latter half of 2022, we should actually be returning to the level of pre-corona. So then we would be back at where we were at the beginning of last year. Now, why is it that we did not decline all that much? That is in particular because of a massive government support to the economy. Our government injected some 39 billion euros in the economy, or in other words, 39,000 million euros was spent over the last year, and we're still counting. I think last week another 7 billion was promised to companies. Most of it went to companies and to payroll support, thinking that as long as the companies keep their qualified people, they will be well positioned to pick up and the economy to pick up steam again when things get better. What does it mean for government finances? Because it sounds like an enormous amount. Well, actually, it's not all that bad. We had a government debt of below 50% when all this started of gross domestic product. That is very low by European standards. To give you an idea, Italy is 160%, and they still manage to borrow money. So we are at 50% when all this started, and at the moment that has increased to about 60% of GDP, the state debt. Obviously, the tax income declined somewhat. So on top of that 39 that we spent extra, we had another 3 that we earned less. So in total, state debt increased by 42. There was some doubt in the beginning whether that money wouldn't go to zombie companies that actually needed to go under, or that were already near bankrupt and that were now being kept up by artificially by state support, hindering what an economist Schumacher called the creative destruction that always takes place in an economy. But university studies that have been conducted up until now indicate that that is not the case. Most of the money was well spent on good companies, so that is very very satisfying. And I might also mention that, yeah, why were we capable to do all this? Well, that's also because we've been quite strict in our spending before COVID and all of that happened to us. The Dutch government by nature tends to be on the austere side. And then
2 minutes, 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, then to my last one, winners and losers. Winners, ICT by a long margin, web shops, delivery companies. In a broader sense, climate and nature, all winners. Somebody mentioned also funeral homes. That's a bit morbid, but it's true. And then the losers, the cultural sector, museums, etc., all closed, still closed in the Netherlands. Hotels, restaurants are having a very, very hard time. The entire travel branch, tourism, is having a hard time. Globalization, in general, I think, got a hit. The elderly, obviously, and also us men. I don't know if you know, but 2/3 of the people who die of COVID are men. So for us men, it's not a particularly good time. And the last loser, and here I will conclude, is paper money. Thank you, Marco. Over to you.
That was fantastic, Aart. Thank you so much.
All right.
I love the way you managed to get your 4 topics into 10 minutes. Compliments. I hope the other speakers have paid attention to that. And very interesting to end with winners and losers. I think that's an excellent take on it. And as men, I guess we have to be extra careful, whether it's our health, whether it's working, or whether it's our relationships, being at home all the time. That
so it seems, Marco.
Can also be a lose-lose situation in some cases. All right, thank you so much, Aart. And for those of you who would like to speak more with the ambassador, you may select his breakout room later. Okay, moving on to our next guest, Mr. Nazhif Yusoff, the Country Director of Vriens and Partners, who will speak about the 2021 Outlook Malaysia, Politics and Policy. Nazhif is a frequent guest at our webinars and events, and of course also with our colleagues from the Malaysian Danish Business Council. Yeah, definitely a frequent guest, an opportunity for our members to listen to him. All right, Nazhif, over to you. It's a very interesting time in politics Malaysia. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Marco, for the introduction. It's always, of course, very interesting to talk about Malaysian politics. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. So I'll be running through a bit about what to expect this year on the political and policy sides for Malaysia, especially quite timely given the Prime Minister's recent speech just now on TV regarding the emergency and the implementation of vaccine rollout. But basically, I'll just do a quick background about us, Vriens and Partners. Many of you might not be aware of who we are. We are essentially a government affairs consultancy for the private sector. We help private sector companies build effective, productive relationships with stakeholders in government across all levels. We have 80 staff and 30 senior councillors across 8 of our offices around the region. This is our team in Malaysia, consultants, as well as our senior advisors, one of whom was the former Chief Secretary to the government, Tan Sri Dr. Ismail, recently retired, and Dr. Chua and Dr. Sharin Madros, covering the healthcare side, as well as Dr. Sharin on trade, specifically as the former CEO of Trade. These are some of our services: development of government affairs strategy, regulatory risk strategies, advocacy strategy, as well as political intelligence. Okay, so I'll just dive right in for the interest of time. Just politically, what can we expect for Malaysia in 2021? To say that 2020 was an eventful year, I think would be an understatement, right? And 2021 started off even more eventful with the surprise declaration of emergency by Prime Minister. Of course, he and the cabinet tried to declare emergency in the 4th quarter of last year and sought the consent of the Council of Rulers to do that. But that having failed, now because of the increase in COVID cases and the current lockdown situation that we are in, generally that has basically allowed the Prime Minister to declare emergency, to basically call a ceasefire, right, for all kinds of politicking or usurpations of power, right, competitions for power. But at the heart of this is really how is the support for Prime Minister Muhyiddin as the Prime Minister looking like, right? There have been mentions among the opposition that they are declaring support, chiefly for Anwar Ibrahim, right, the long-time opposition leader as a Prime Minister candidate. It's not unanimous, but he still leads the pack. Will there be other candidates coming to the fore? That remains up in the air. Also, the question about elections. Prime Minister has given assurance in his speech just now that once cases are under control, the emergency is lifted, then he will call for snap elections, right? So how will that look like? Will there be new alliances? It looks like it, right? Given the tenuous relationships between the component parties in the current government, the current ruling coalition. And how will the alliances on the opposition side look like as well, given the rift between the two main leaders, Anwar Ibrahim and the former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, right? So, I mean, the new reality in Malaysia is that fluid political alignments are going to stay. They're going to be reality for the medium term. And this is, of course, a dramatic reversal from just a couple of years ago when Barisan Nasional, the coalition that was ruling Malaysia for more than 60 years, was the only, the biggest ruling coalition in the nation's history, right? The longest serving as well. And we're not going to return to that kind of scenario for any foreseeable future. In fact, it's more fluid than ever. On the policy side, what are we going to be looking at this year? Of course, what took us by surprise earlier this year is, as I mentioned, the emergency ordinance, right? And the implications of that. what kind of power will the government exercise through its under the emergency ordinance? The speech just now mentioned that the government will use emergency ordinances to tighten SOPs and rules related to controlling the COVID outbreak, especially among migrant worker communities, right? Regulating migrant housing, etc., migrant worker housing, etc. And also, I mean, we can expect, right, one form or another of the movement control orders to remain in place. Right now, we're under the stricter form of the MCO, right? As the year unravels, we're going to see how the government is going to basically adapt its strategy on lockdown to the changing reality, probably as vaccination starts to roll out, which I'll talk about in a bit. Second is, where's Parliament in all of this, right? The third branch of government that is not functioning currently, because the marquee policy initiative of any government that rules Malaysia, it would be the Malaysia Plan, the 5-year Malaysia Plan, because what this does is sets out a lot of the development expenditure limits for ministries, agencies over the next 5 years. That was supposed to be tabled end of last year, and then it was brought forward to the early of this year, supposed to be in March session of Parliament, but now there's no more parliamentary sessions, right? So how is the government's 5-year planning cycle going to look like? And what are the implications on the passing of budget 2022? Any government that runs will need a budget, and this government, even if emergency is lifted later in the year, will still need to table a budget for approval, and we will probably see the kind of politicking that we saw with budget 2021, right, late last year. At the same time, it will. I believe there'll be a presentation on economics later on, but basically tax policy, right? How revenue enhancing measures, government, because of the rollout of the stimulus packages, although there's been a lot of criticism about that the amount of fiscal stimulus is actually quite low compared to the whole package. The government is, of course, under a lot of strain in terms of enhancing revenue collection, right? The government has always been asked whether it's going to reintroduce the goods and services tax. For now, there is a committee looking into that, but of course, timing will be very important because it's a very politically sensitive issue that strikes at the very core bread butter issues for many Malaysians, right? So, how will the government think through its revenue enhancing measures to fund and stimulus measures down the line to boost the economy? And lastly is, of course, vaccines. That's the silver lining. So far, that's our way out of the crisis, herd immunity. And Prime Minister Muhyiddin just confirmed that the Minister of Science will be in charge of the vaccine rollout under 3 phases. Phases 1 focusing on frontliners, however so defined, which is still a bit unclear, but healthcare workers, police officers, military, etc. And phase 2 will be basically the elderly. Phase 3 is the general population, right? Will the rollout be a success? It will really depend on how the government is executing its plan. And basically the political survival of this government will hinge upon success of a vaccine rollout program. Finally, just some emergent risks to consider for businesses here, right, in Malaysia. I guess it is best to be conservative, right, during such difficult times, to expect that there will be continued disruptions to the economy's functioning because of COVID-19. So keeping abreast of the government announcements on industries allowed to operate, right, will be the norm for this year, as it was for last year. What I alluded to earlier about the delays in policy rollout also might affect your companies, especially if you do business with government, especially in terms of the next 5-year policy cycle under the Malaysia Plan, right? And what to watch out for also in terms of budget 2022 and Parliament's role in this latter half of the year. Of course, business sentiment was a bit dampened because of the emergency ordinance. The government has gone to great lengths, meeting with chambers, business associations to assure them that the emergency ordinance will solely be used for the COVID response. But I mean, the headline is, of course, not positive to the general business community at large, especially the investor community, trying to reassure them that it's actually business as usual in Malaysia in many cases. when it comes to the non-COVID related sectors of the economy that private sector can chip in for investment. I mean, the MIDA presentation previously showed to us that there's significant interest in Malaysia as an investment destination still. How can the government actually maintain that image among the foreign investor community? Right, and finally is of course this general political instability. The only way out from this impasse is an election. What are the considerations that the government will take into account in calling for an election? Low case numbers, for example, new SOPs for elections to be held, online campaigning like our neighbors down south in Singapore did last year. How will that look like if there were an election at the end of this year? And will an election actually solve anything? Because as we've seen, the political alliances are so fluid that even with an election, the outcomes still might be a toss-up, right? Which is a completely uncharted territory for Malaysia. So are we going to expect continued power struggle between the political parties? How is the opposition going to differentiate itself policy-wise from the government? And finally, how all of those parties that are struggling for power going to differentiate themselves to capture the public's imagination and ultimately win power, right? If there is an election called latter half of the year, as the Prime Minister alluded to in his speech. Okay. That's all for my presentation right now to MDBC. But if you do have any questions regarding the presentation, please feel free to contact me by email that as you can see there, nazhif@vrienspartners.com. Thank you, Marco.
Nazhif, or of course join the breakout room with Nazhif later to talk more in depth about all these Malaysian elements at this moment. It's indeed the local climate is very difficult to summarize in 10 minutes, but you did an excellent job, Nazhif. Thank you so much. In the meantime, I'm reading the first messages that came out of the Prime Minister's speech, especially in our app groups with MITI and with economic sectors and with chambers. Those are not overly positive, if I might say. Apparently not much more opening up. Especially the business sectors are very concerned about the current situation. And I think we have a role to play to get the numbers down as quickly as possible so that more business sectors can open up, because it will start hurting on the other side as well.
Exactly.
Definitely. Yeah. All right, thank you, Nazhif. Okay, would love to move on to our speaker from Singapore, Mr. Jonathan Koh, the Asia economist for Standard Chartered Bank Berhad. And Jonathan will take an economic point of view on the global and Malaysia outlook. Over to you, Jonathan. You're still muted. Jonathan, I'm not sure if we can hear you. Can you try again, please? No, we cannot hear you. I'm not sure what went wrong compared to the test just now. Maybe it's your headphones. No, not yet. We cannot hear you yet.
Wait, sorry about
Yes, here we go. All right.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure why it didn't work.
All right, go ahead.
You can see my presentation slides.
Yes, excellent.
Okay, perfect.
Go ahead.
Okay, hi, sorry for the technical glitch. So yeah, today I'll be here. Thanks for having me, and today I'll be sharing with you the global as well as the Malaysia economic outlook. So I think pretty much 2020 was a pretty tough year. I think everyone can agree on that. And for 2021, I think we can pretty much summarize it looking at this picture here, whereby, and I mean the Menti sentiment words that came out of it was better and hope. So you can see a rainbow here, which really represents some hope. But at the same time, if you look at the word cloud, there was also things like uncertainty and risk, which is really represented by still the dark clouds that we are seeing. So as we are still dealing with this global pandemic. So without further ado, let me continue on with my presentation. Now, so what does the economic outlook for 2021 look like? I think on the global front, there are really four key things that I would like to highlight to you. Four key takeaways. First is that global growth is going to rebound. And a lot of it actually has to do with base effect. So last year, global growth, we are forecasting it to come in at minus 3.8%. And for this year, it's going to be around positive 4.8%. So a good way to look at it is actually if you just average the 2 years, it's only a growth of around 0.5%. So it's actually pretty soft if you look at it that way. So because of base effect, year-on-year numbers are going to look pretty good. Now, the second key takeaway is that Asia is likely to continue to outperform. I mean, if you look at last year's numbers, Asia contracted the least. And for this year itself, Asia is probably going to expand the most. Now, that's the second takeaway. The third takeaway is that even though, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to see very strong year-on-year numbers, we may actually take some time before economies actually return to pre-COVID-19 levels, and we define that being Q4 2019. So if you look at the left-hand side chart, for example, the US barely returns to pre-COVID levels by end of 2021. And for the Euro area, it's probably going to take even more time. Of course, China has outperformed and is already way past pre-COVID levels even last year. But for most of the countries in the region, probably you're going to wait till the end of this year before you actually return to pre-COVID-19 levels. That's the third key takeaway. Now, the fourth takeaway is that when we look at growth this year, as I mentioned earlier, year-on-year numbers are going to look very strong, especially in Q2 for most of the economies and Q1 for China. So we prefer to look at the growth momentum by looking actually at sequential growth, which is basically Q-on-Q growth. And here, we think that sequential growth is likely to pick up mostly in the second half of this year, being that we think that widespread vaccination is probably only likely in the second half of the year. Developed economies have some of them have already started, but we think that widespread inoculation is probably only going to be at the end of this, in the second half of this year. So those are the four key takeaways on the global growth outlook. Now, let me pivot slightly to inflation. Now, on inflation, we actually expect inflation to remain subdued. I mean, there have been recent concerns floating around in the markets that there may be inflationary pressures. But if you look at it, a lot of that may actually be coming from supply side tightness due to economic restrictions or mobility restrictions still remaining in place due to the pandemic. As these restrictions actually ease, the price pressures will actually fade. And when we look at it from the demand side perspective, your economy is actually unlikely to be operating near potential, which means that you actually have a negative output gap. And what this means is that demand side inflation is likely to remain subdued for the year. So that's our main take. For supply side pressures to actually ease and for demand side inflation to actually remain subdued due to the negative output gap. Now, last year, clearly fiscal policy was unprecedented in nature, both in terms of the size of the policy itself as well as the quantum. Now, size as well as the speed. But for this year itself, when we look across the globe as well as across the region, most of the governments are probably going to tighten the fiscal purse slightly. Fiscal deficits are probably going to be narrowed. So for example, in Malaysia's case, it's going to be narrowed from 6% of GDP to 5.4% of GDP. But really, 5.4% of fiscal deficit is still pretty substantial, especially when you compare to pre-COVID levels. So that's on the fiscal side. It's probably going to be lesser than last year, but it's still going to be very substantial versus pre-COVID levels, as we still need fiscal policy to actually support economic growth in this recovery. So I've mentioned some of the key supporting factors for global growth. Now, what are some of the risks that we need to take note of? I mean, clearly COVID-19, the pandemic itself, as well as vaccine disappointment is a clear risk. But what are some other risks that may actually impede the growth recovery and achieving a better 2021? First is potential premature withdrawal of policy support. Now, we are not really talking about central banks hiking rates or anything like that, but more of potentially market-induced tightness. I mean, you see recently, inflation break-evens have actually rose quite a lot. For example, it can come from the form of the 10-year yield actually steepening quite significantly. So all this may actually create pockets of stress and tighten liquidity conditions, tighten financial conditions. So I think potential premature withdrawal of policy support is actually a risk. And you see from the left-hand side chart, actually a lot of economies have already performed. Most of the rate cuts have already been front-loaded. So it's unlikely that we're going to see too much more rate cuts this year. So this is a key risk that we are watching out for. And on top of that, when we look at it from the real economic perspective, we actually see loan growth still being soft. So despite rates being low, because animal spirits are actually weak, loan growth has actually still been soft. So if let's say you end up in a scenario where interest rates somehow become higher because of induced by financial markets, that may actually mean that your loan growth will continue to remain weak, and that does not bode well for the economic outlook. Now, the second key risk is actually leverage. So if we look at it last year, as of Q2 last year, global debt to GDP has actually risen more than 20 percentage points. And by end of the last year itself could actually be 30 percentage points. It's similar to global financial crisis times, but the difference is that we are starting from a much higher base. And if let's say, as I mentioned earlier, if interest rates actually pick up, we are probably going to see pockets of stress in certain sectors. So I think this is another key risk to be wary of. Now, the third key risk is on the geopolitical front. Now, US and China relationship is probably key to monitor here. Of course, we know that under a Biden administration, he's probably going to take a more multilateral approach and go by a more diplomatic playbook. But if there's one thing that the Democrats and Republicans agree on, even if they don't agree on many things, is actually that they have to be hard on China. So I think this is still a key development to take note of, especially if it evolves to something like a US-China trade war. I'm not saying that it will happen, but I think it's something that we should be wary of, as we have seen the impact of the US-China trade war, which actually led to lower global trade volumes. Allow me to now quickly touch on Malaysia. So yeah, Malaysia-wise,
2 minutes, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Malaysia-wise, forecasting a contraction last year, a strong rebound to 7.5% this year. Now, the MCO has been mentioned by Nazhif previously, but how we are actually viewing this MCO is that we actually think that the impact of this MCO may actually be less than the first round of MCO, being that I think there are a few reasons. First, MCO this time is actually less stringent than the last time. Secondly, the world is not in synchronized lockdown during this MCO, creating demand and supply side issues, whereas it was in the first round of lockdowns. Thirdly, policy stimulus support measures have already been announced, and they still remain pretty much in place. And lastly, we also have the promise of a vaccine that should help to limit the downside in confidence. Malaysia itself has already secured vaccines to cover around 80 to 90% of its population. Now, when we look at growth for Malaysia, I think two key drivers here. First is the consumer. We think that that's why we have to watch the labour market closely, given that the consumer actually accounted for 90% of growth over the past 2 years. And the second driver we think is going to come from public investments. Nazhif previously touched on the budget. Last year's budget, there was actually a huge increase in development expenditure of around 50% year on year. So that should mean that whatever funds last year was being reallocated away from infrastructure spending, in last year's budget, probably they have increased it for this year's budget. So previously it all went to pandemic relief efforts, but now they are reallocating it back to infrastructure spending. So of course, that's hopefully that the pandemic clears as soon as possible. So these are two key drivers: consumer spending as well as public investments. So just quickly on the budget itself, I think Nazhif previously touched. So one key factor that we are also watching, as he mentioned, is clearly the revenue area, which is a concern in terms of the GST and SST gap, which is actually equivalent to 1.5% of GDP. So I think that is something that many rating agencies as well as ourselves are actually keeping an eye on. And also on the fiscal front, as I mentioned, it's still substantial, but consolidating the deficit, because Malaysia is also subjected to a debt ceiling. The estimate is that by the end of this year, it's going to be 59.2%, which may actually be very close to the new debt ceiling of 60%. So, which is why still substantial, but the deficit has to be consolidated. On monetary policy, very quickly, we expect BNM to pause for now. As I mentioned earlier, I think two key reasons. We don't think that the MCO this time around is going to have as great a hit to economic growth as the first round of MCO. And secondly, the promise of the vaccine is probably going to help limit the downside in confidence. And also, you have, for example, EPF measures whereby now close to 25 to 30 billion ringgit has already been withdrawn. If you assume just 80% of that being spent in the economy, that already equates to around 1.5% of GDP. Now, and very quickly, lastly on the ringgit, this is my last slide. We expect the dollar ringgit at 390 this year on the back of three things. First, we expect a broad dollar weakness because of structural factors such as the loss of your interest rate differential, widening twin deficits. And on the ringgit front, higher commodity prices should benefit the ringgit. And also on the trade balance front, Malaysia's trade balance will continue to help the ringgit, although that story may actually turn in the second half of this year. Now, with that, I've come to the end of the presentation and looking forward to your questions in the breakout session. Thank you.
Excellent, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, you had a very tough time, of course, trying to fit all this information into 10 minutes. You did a great job at making it very practical, talking about the ringgit, talking about inflation and growth recovery, of course. So thank you so much for joining. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, if you have additional questions, do join Jonathan in the breakout room later. All right, moving on to Gerard Levenburg, the Country General Manager of Informa Markets UBM, who will talk about the future of trade exhibitions in Malaysia. Gerard, you've been involved in more than 200 exhibitions in your life. You've always been very busy shaking hands and networking with everybody live.
Yeah, hugging a lot.
Life is looking very much different for you at this moment. And I think we're going to start off with your video that also kind of displays what's happening in your sector, correct?
Yes, thank you very much, Marco. Just like Mr. Ambassador, and it's not coordinated, I have 4 short pieces to talk about. One is a bit about business events and Informa Markets. The second is what this all has meant for us, so COVID-19 in 2020 in Malaysia. The third part about how we look at 2021, and the fourth part is about how we look at beyond 2021. So 10 minutes. So please, Adeline, if you could start the video. Thank you very much, Marco and Adeline, for inviting me to share some thoughts about trade exhibitions. thank you very much for showing that video. And this, of course, is not to promote informal markets as a company, but it's to show what we're doing. And you see a lot of handshakes, you see a lot of high fives, you see a lot of people together. We organize meetings, we organize physical meetings, and we are the biggest player in the world globally. So you can imagine what COVID has meant to us as a business in 2020. I'm going to share a couple of slides now. Let me see if I have everything. So yeah, this is not a good business to be in during COVID. Obviously, you know, I would probably be categorized by Mr. Ambassador in the category losers. Just like hospitality, travel industry, airlines, if you organize physical meetings, it's just not a good place to be. But a lot of positive things are coming out of this as well. In 2020, for us, this was characterized with a couple of words: postponements. We had to postpone all our big shows. And just let me emphasize here, I'm just responsible for Malaysia. We have large scale events in the furniture industry, oil and gas industry, food and hospitality industry, well, various industries. It's all B2B. And of course, we didn't know really what hit us in the beginning of the year. And we had to postpone first from Q3 towards the back of the year. And it became clear we had to keep on postponing and postponing and postponing. And we've been quite busy on postponing a lot of things. And at the same time, we were developing, and not just us, this is also with business event industry partners within Malaysia, ways of how we could conduct our business, how we could get people together in a safe and healthy way. And this is one of the test events we have run together with our partners here within Malaysia, called a New Normal Business Events, which adheres totally to the social operational procedures at that time in Malaysia, with social distancing, etc. Business events are not large-scale mass events. So our industry really feels that if malls can be open and controlled, we are able to have controlled meetings as well. And this is, apart from the next event, the only event I could do with my team in 2020 within Malaysia. To give you an idea, we achieved 3% of our original budget in Malaysia in 2020. So just two small events in 2020, but a lot of virtual events we developed very quickly in different industries, and that gave us a lot of learnings on how to do this better. This is totally new for us, for our people, our teams. Everybody is always into physical events, and we were forced to very quickly create solutions for our customers, for them to meet buyers in the various industries we serve within Malaysia. We've done a number of these virtual trade exhibitions, and we learned quite a lot. First of all, it's difficult to convince what we say normally fans of trade exhibitions to go virtual. And that's normal. They like physical for a reason. They don't like digital that much. And this is, of course, our prime target group. Furthermore, it's very labor intensive. So you really have to think about practical things like downloading videos, setting up matchmaking events. There's technology involved. It's very, very labor intensive. And you have to take your traditional customers by the hand. Very positive here. What we found out with virtual exhibitions is we found new audiences, new exhibitors we didn't know in various industries, and new visitors. And of course, these are smaller players normally in the industry who cannot afford or do not like physical exhibitions. So this is a very, very positive finding we had. We did find one problem in general with virtual events, and that is the lack of engagement. It's very difficult to really get the public engaged. While at an exhibition, there's always, coincidence meetings, there's a lot of social events going on. You always have a nice day, and online it's really very, very much targeted. So the need for real targeted business matching came up very, very clearly. So micro communities instead of large audiences. The need for networking came up as something we have to offer better. And internally, we had to look at our pricing models, because everybody thinks, everything is for free on the internet, and it's a lot of work we have to conduct. Now,
2 minutes, Gerard. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm speeding up. This is our program for 2021. As you can see, all our live events, we have moved towards the back of the year, hoping that things will be more positive. Now, except for the furniture fair, all of these events are very domestically oriented when it comes to visitors. We're quite confident that we will be able to run trade events if, of course, COVID permitting. And one of the solutions we're going to offer to make up, I would say, for the international visitor part or the lack of it, and the lack of international exhibitors is what we call in our industry the hybridization. Of course, facing these challenges, will it be allowed for us to organize events? Will people have confidence, health and safety? So we have to work very hard on that. Travel restrictions. I'm very happy, of course, to hear about the initiative of MIDA earlier this afternoon. Our ecosystem, contractors, carpet, audio, visual, venues, everybody's under pressure. We have not made any revenues or very little revenues the last year. And our customers, and this is very important. The mindset of our customers and their customers has changed because they've been much more accustomed to using digital tools to reach their audiences, which also, of course, as I said, offers a lot of opportunities. For 2021 and beyond then, yes, I'm positive. We can't look into the future, but what we see is a strong appetite for face-to-face. In China, for example, where we conduct our business actually with larger crowds under control, obviously since June already. In China, our trade shows are doing very well. Trade events as an economic recovery accelerator is being recognized actually all over the place. So we get a lot of government support and also in Malaysia to get things going again. Like I said, the digital space offers us new audiences, which is great. We have the opportunity to get really more into depth about the needs of our customers and creating micro communities, both live and online. So the hybrid component. We're finding new interesting partners in working together with digital partners, but also traditional competitors. So we're really becoming more unified in the industry. Our staff has gone through a very quick educational process when it comes to digitalization, which I consider super positive. They are almost all of them digital experts within a year. So this is all very positive for 2021. We won't be going back to normal pre-COVID because the whole perception of business events has changed. Digitalization, yes, shift in mindset. Companies look different. Our role is going to be different. Our business model is evolving. But I think that's a very positive thing. People are just more focused on what they want to get out on their investment on live events in the future. And the digital component gives us a lot of extra opportunities which we normally would not have. I want to end with this slide. This is the Malaysian hub. We all miss it. So I do believe face-to-face is coming back strongly. We will have to reposition ourselves as organizer of meetings, and we do embrace the digital space in order to do that better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerard. Is that Barack Obama?
That is Obama visiting Malaysia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, before he visited one of our trade shows.
Great, but you never had an opportunity to hug him personally?
I will, one day.
You will one day. All right. Gerard, thank you so much for sharing the extremely difficult year that you had and turning that into positives and opening up new markets. I think we can all learn from that. If you're so far down compared to your expectations for the year to still be able to turn things around. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Shan Said, the Chief Economist of GUI IQI Holdings, who will speak to us on the macroeconomic and especially the property sector. Shan, you're in the show. Welcome. Good to see you again. How are you?
Thank you, Marco. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Malaysia and Dutch Business Council, for having me in the show. I'll go very quickly. I'll talk about global macro. I'll talk about Malaysia, valuations and property market. Global macroeconomic outlook, it looks quite fragile and we expect more uncertainty. 2021 will be tougher than 2020. So if somebody thinks that there will be recovery in 2021, I doubt. 21 will be very tougher than 2020. The main reason is you have the recovery process will take a long time. The COVID is here to stay till 2022. The vaccine will take its time. Plus, I feel that geopolitical risk is getting higher, which will make an impact across all economies, and I will discuss it later. Valuations in equity and bond markets are not based on reality. They are based on printing presses unleashed by the global central bank. The market is distorted. So bonds are pari passu with equities, and there is an asset flip. Bonds are acting like equities, and equities are trading like bonds. And we expect China to take the lead in the global economic recovery. Europe will take a lot of time. We expect Europe to recover by 2024-25. Same goes for Japan, and same goes for US. We expect interest rates will not rise globally before 2023. At this time, if interest rates go up, many economies will go not into recession, but depression. Coming to Malaysia, bringing down to Malaysia, a lot of people are throwing numbers, talking about 7, 8, 9%. We have been sharing with our valued investors that Malaysia's GDP for this year will be trading between 3 and 4%. This has been all documented in our newsletter. It had been recorded in press and media, so everything is there. A ringgit for this year is 367 and 410. The premise is that oil prices will go higher, between $50 and $70 per barrel. US dollar will take a huge depreciation. We can expect significant depreciation by 20%. Last year, US dollar went down by 16%. Discount rate will be trading between 1 and 1.75%. Bank Negara will take the policy lever as per the market condition. Inflation to remain subdued under 1.5%. Debt to GDP ratio to remain at 60%, which is quite reasonable. And budget deficit to be between 6 and 7%. We expect Malaysia to have much better policy response as compared to many economies in Europe or in US or in Japan or UK, because government in a position to tackle this COVID-19 in a much better way. So the global investors like Juai, IQI and many others, they are looking at policy instrument. Does the government has the ability to maintain macroeconomic stability? And in these turbulent times, two factors have emerged significantly. One is economic confidence and the other is fear. Wherever you have economic confidence, you can expect GDP growth, and wherever you have fear, you can expect subpar growth or even negative growth. Coming to property. Since 2013, ever since I joined IQI, people have been sharing that Malaysian property market is in bubble, our property market will crash. So what is a bubble? A bubble happens when land prices are crashing. That is a sign of a bubble. Let me give you some key statistics for IQI. In 2019, our sales touched 3.2 billion ringgit. In 2020, despite lockdown, despite COVID, despite 70% of the economies locking down, our sales were 5.5 billion ringgit. That was 70% growth. And this year, in January alone, we have recorded sales of $200 million, which is roughly like 800 million ringgit. So despite whatever people have been saying, the market is very soft, which is true. There is an oversupply of properties, which is again very true. But it's a matter of how you really position yourself. So our competitive positioning in the market is that IQI is very aggressive. And in these turbulent times, you have two strategies. One is to stay passive. Wait for the market, it will recover, or economies will come back to pre-COVID 2022, and then we will go and hit the market. Or the other strategy is you stay aggressive, because everybody, the clients have got money. People are sitting on cash. There is no travel, there is no tourism, there is no much spending. So most of the investors are sitting on cash. And in these turbulent times, the only fixed asset that goes up is land, and IQI is dealing with that. Some of the key areas where we have witnessed much growth, because right now the market is between 500,000 to 1.5 million ringgit. That's where the market is. But most of the transactions that we have witnessed in the last 6 months is 500,000 to 750 or 800,000 ringgit. Key areas: Damansara, Old Klang Road, Bukit Jalil, Bangsa South, Monkiara, PJ, Cheras, City, Petaling. In Penang is Bayan Lebas, Phuket, Bentiara. In Johor Bahru, you have Johor Bahru and Pasir Gudang. So these are some of the areas where investors are taking key interest, because the valuation and the upside is pretty high. So what we have done in the last 1 year in this COVID landscape, that we have maintained engagement strategy, because in these tempestuous times, clients are looking for someone to hold their hands and they want continuous information. And what we share in the market, it is based on critical reasoning, it is based on market-driven data, and above all, it has substance. We don't share tabloid stories or Cinderella stories that ringgit is going to crash or Malaysia GDP will have a massive collapse. No, we don't do that. Our newsletter, our market intelligence report is based on the ground, human boots on the ground information. When we gather and we share this newsletter with our investors, they know that IQI will get facts and figures. And plus with our global networking, which is pretty strong, we share value and we share substance. I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
Sean, you're shocking me here. I was not prepared yet. You still had 2 minutes.
I think I share substance. I don't share.
You talk way too fast. I hope the audience was able to follow you. You always have so much to talk about, so many facts and the data, of course, available for us. Great to hear that the organization is doing well. There's still a lot of opportunities, of course, in the market. You just need to be aware of them. So thank you for sharing. I believe that you don't have an opportunity to stay with us in the breakout rooms later, so that's a shame. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, if you do have specific questions for Sean, please let me know or write it in the chat, and we will forward them to Sean, and then hopefully we can give you the answers in writing at a later date. All right, thank you so
Marco.
much. And I hope that in the meantime Vijay has been able to be ready as well.
I'm here.
We go into a specific specific part of property, of course, which affects all of us as corporates on a daily basis, and that's our working space as well. So Mr. Vijay, the country head of Malaysia, Indonesia and Brunei of Regis, or IWG, will now talk about flexible workspace and the post-COVID workforce. Vijay, great to have you on board again for this MDBC event. Floor is all yours.
Hi Marco, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I hope you can hear me well. I'm actually sitting in a flexible workspace area.
Of course you are. Maybe you should take away your virtual backdrop and let us see in what kind of nice area you are. Are you in the Regis or in the Spaces?
I'm in Regis, but it's going to be too late now to change now.
All right. Let me do a small promo for you. Of course, Spaces is part of the IWG group as well. And Spaces is a Dutch initiative. How can I call it? Dutch founded kind of creative workspace.
Yeah, that's one of our multi-brand. Okay, so let me start with, let me just move my slides. Okay. Okay, so my whole, I know I have 10 minutes, but I want to walk through with lots of changes that's been happening on the workspaces. And if you look at the first chart that I put up, flexible and remote working, I know it's getting very popular now. But if you really look at the chart, the growth, which has been a staggering growth that we had, is already there on the rise before the start of 2020. So in 2010, we had, in the sense that the entire flexible workforce sectors, it had 600,000 members, and now it has moved up to 2.6 million in year 2020. What has changed in year 2020, especially after the COVID, is there's been a massive acceleration. People who had a lot more challenges, who had doubts of going with flexible workforce, started to switch and look at their real estate portfolio again. So if you look at this, and these are still all pre-COVID numbers, I wanted to show how the flexible office space has been operating ever since and how the change is going to happen now. So on an average, on annual growth, we have 13% annual growth on flexible workspace. Over the last 7 to 8 years, the flexible workspace have grown 22%. That's compared to 1% growth in the traditional and conventional offices that we call. And we did a couple of surveys pre-COVID, and we could do that comparison again post-COVID as well. But the pre-COVID, in January 2020, there was 73% of companies already started working flexibly. And the other interesting one we did was in Malaysia and also in global as well. So we had basically some surveys done with the employees. And we found out that 80% of people saying that they would more likely to choose a job that offers flexible working. Now, during the COVID-19, so what has happened is we did the survey again. So we've been having a lot of, interviews during the COVID period, and we found that 53% of the Malaysian workforce was actually working remotely in COVID-19. Interestingly, US had about 44% and UK had 50%. And globally, the number was 45%. So basically 45% of the workforce was working remotely, either at home or either some spaces which is close to their house. So again, before pre-COVID-19, basically us being the flexible space providers, we have had quite easy to explain the benefits. People who've been using us will know the benefits. If you're in a flexible office space, you don't need to commute all the way to the head office. There are spaces where they can work close to home. Of course, productivity increases because you don't need to spend too much time commuting to the offices, and they can spend less time and do more productive job within the spaces within their housing area. It obviously improves work-life balance. One of the biggest benefits that companies see, obviously, is financial benefits. That helps them to reduce the real estate costs, and of course, moving their office space cost out of the balance sheet. But there was still some challenges that we had in pre-COVID, because some of them did not want to go into a co-working or flexible office space because they were concerned about their cyber data security, especially some of the financial institutions, some of larger MNCs. They were also afraid, they could not, if their employees are sitting in a remote space and not in head office, they will not be able to access the technology. They will not be able to run out reports. And the last one was quite, how to put it as, I will not say lack of trust, but employers themselves want the employees to be within the reach, within the same office, to check and track them whether they are actually working productively. And that has all changed when it happened during the pandemic. So what actually COVID-19 has done is it has actually forced the whole world into, I would say, more of a global remote working experiment. People who have not seen the benefits started to see the benefits. People who have seen challenges before started to find a solution for those challenges. And in post-COVID-19, what we see is we've been looking through all the inquiries they've been having, the businesses that we are working with. That I could take more than that, but I took up the five important points that we have seen that has changed the entire platform of workspace. The first one is the enterprises are changing strategy. The enterprises means large global corporations who have basically offices all around the world. And they are changing their strategy because the first thing is for safety reasons. They want to distribute their workforce to other offices as well. So distributed workforce, which we think it's going to be the future. They're not going to have a 500 employees sitting in one location, because if one of them are infected, the rest of their workforce will not be able to come to work. The other thing is they also want them to feel closer home, because a lot of them prefer to work from home. And you will see another slide after this that will say that not all are going to be working from home, because you're going to have a lot of challenges if you're going to work from home. So the distributed workforce also helps them to have certain part of the department to work from head office and some of them to work from different remote areas. And this also helps them to embrace the physical distancing. Now the trend of working has also changed. We call it, you will hear this word quite often now, we call it hybrid workforce. Hybrid workforce are people who want to work at home 50% of the time, and the 50% of the time they want to be in the office, because they probably want to meet their customers, they probably want to do a face-to-face meeting. And so this is increasingly becoming popular. Hub and spoke model is, this is quite a buzzword when you talk about supply chain logistics, but it's being used now quite often in the real estate portfolio. Hub and spoke model is basically large companies like even Google, Facebook. You will see that what's happening in the US, and you can even see that some of the Asian countries they will still keep their large space at their own space at a head office, but those branches that they have across the countries, they're not going to invest on their real estate. Instead, go into flexible office spaces and use some of their work, their employees to be there. They have already been, if you read in the news, there's a big circulation going on. Amazon and Google, all of them are going to be embracing this flexible office space, and they're still going to have 50% of their workforce in the office and 50% working remotely. Now, it also helps for employers and employees because you give them a flexibility of working pretty close home and flexible hours as well. So this takes away the restriction of them working from one single office. Now, business continuity plan, which in some circumstances we call a disaster recovery plan, is always been a priority for most companies. But during this COVID and it's going to be post-COVID-19, this becomes the utmost important priority for most companies. We are getting huge inquiries on this because people want to make sure that this is taken care of. So when the next pandemic comes, they are prepared that there is another place for them to work if their workspace are not be able to use. Now, all this is enabled by obviously through digitalization. The advent of digital has actually gone through, fundamentally changing, the way companies work, and of course, the way people want to work for companies as well. Now, I touched earlier on some of the challenges, and I think some of you guys would have gone through this as well, and some of them who are still working from home. Internet connectivity is always sometimes an issue. And if you want to have a con call, I do have the problem. So, you have this kind of issues coming in, and there are, you have your families at home, so sometimes it's a bit difficult to, you'll get distracted, and the time spent productively at home may not be there. And some of them still feel that companies still feel that there's not much of a cybersecurity data if you're using your internet at home. So there are going to be challenges, and I would not say that everyone is not going to stop working from home. There's going to be still a certain percentage of people going to be working at home, but majority of them will be looking for an option to go for flexible workspace or working close to home. That's going to be another option for them.
2 minutes, Vijay. Thank you.
All right. So 2 minutes. Okay, fine. Okay, so for the new norm, for those people who are having traditional offices, there's going to be lots of challenges for them as well. Because if you own a space, you're going to take care of the government regulations. You'll have to do if there's a lockdowns. So there's going to be spaces that are not going to be used. There is going to be additional cost for them to keep it. They're going to spend a lot more time on cleaning, a lot of money. And of course, it's going to be a decrease in productivity as well. Now, distributed workforce, I've already touched that earlier, but that's going to be the way forward and putting the workforces into different locations, which helps them to manage them during this pandemic. Okay, so the last two slides that I'm in, lots of questions were asked to us, is it safe to come back to offices? So those who've been running flexible office spaces like us, even the real estate, even the landlords, they'll have to configure the workspaces to provide all customers with a safe and healthy working environment. So in our context, we have done that. We have reconfigured private offices. We have done meeting rooms that have staggered sittings. We have actually a controlled and clockwise movement throughout the office. Basically with having new signages everywhere, aware of the new measures. Then encouraging social distancing in open specs as well. So if you go to most of the centers that we have, you will see that there is introduction of waiting indicators in our centers. This is to allow for distancing areas such as receptions, kitchens, and lounges. Then there are path indicators to guide people through buildings while reducing contact with others. There are spacing indicators in elevators. You can see that. There is space seating, to accommodate for physical distancing. Obviously, there are mandatory that all employees and customers wear masks, and there's of course hand sanitizer available. Now, so to end it, I think I still have a minute, right? To just end this, what I will say is the new norm is going to be a flexible workspace. Now, the key part of that is going to be distributed workforces. That's going to be the future. And the flexible workspace will be a extremely crucial, very important for getting people back to work in a professional environments in a way that is going to be safe and affordable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Of course, Regis and Spaces have been expanding a lot over this past few years. Hope that you're ready for this potential growth in workspace. And it's also, you will be, as the ambassador, listed in the line of winners during this COVID pandemic. All right, thank you so much for joining us. And I think also with some of the pictures you've shown enough opportunity for some of our companies to get involved and be aware of the opportunities that to still continue working in the office. Actually, of course, especially with webinars like this, we are also in the office with a few of the colleagues to make it all happen. And the rest of the week, we actually work from home most of the time. All right, thank you, Vijay. Which brings us to our last speaker, ladies and gentlemen. And I know, Matt, you have a lot of colleagues in the audience today from the Sunway Group. Matt van Leeuwen, he is the Chief Innovation Officer of the Sunway Group. And Matt will talk about, is technology eating the world? A very interesting topic. And bring it on the next 10 minutes, Matt. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Marco, and hi, everyone. And also nice to see there's so many colleagues of mine in the audience. So let me start off by telling a story, right? And let me bring you back to 2011, February 2011, exactly 10 years ago. At that time, we were just coming out of a financial crisis, right? Wall Street was absolutely bearish about technology stocks. They hated it, right? They thought that technology was at a boom and was about to go bust, similar to the events that were playing out in the 2000s dot-com boom and bust crisis. And this time, we had a guy coming up called Marc Andreessen, right? So Marc Andreessen, for the people who don't know, is one of the top venture capitalists and entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley. And he wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, which was titled, "Software is Eating the World," right? And he gave a few examples like Amazon, who was beating bookstores like Borders out of the water. And he mentioned a few other technology companies that were on the rise. And he said that over the next 10 years, those software companies were going to be leading the world. And mind you, that at that time, you know, when you looked at 2011, like who are the biggest companies on the stock exchange? And most of these companies were the oil and gas businesses that we know. Only Apple was becoming one of the biggest companies in the world at that time. But when we look 5 years down the line in 2016, he was actually right? We saw Google, Facebook, Amazon, right? And a few other technology companies coming to the field, and they became the biggest companies in the world. And they were all based in Silicon Valley. Now, after that, we saw Uber, Netflix, Airbnb, and many other companies. And what these companies had in common were they were not just software companies, right? But they were also moving from an asset heavy to an asset light, or sometimes an asset-less business. Uber is the world's largest taxi company and doesn't own any taxis. Netflix is the world's largest movie house, but owns no cinemas. And Airbnb is the world's largest accommodation provider that owns no real estate. And I was just checking out the stock of Airbnb, and Airbnb went for an IPO just in December. And the price was about $68 at that time. And today it's trading for $185. Now, this is not just because it's a software company, but it has another secret. And that is it's an AI company, right? Today, we're actually seeing the rise of artificial intelligence. And these artificial intelligence companies may be eating the software companies that we know today. So don't just think that when we talk about AI, it's like your voice assistant, like your Siri and your Apple, or it's just Amazon that gives you good recommendation on books or products on their website. No, it's technology companies, it's startups across different industries, from healthcare to food and agriculture to cybersecurity, that is disrupting the field. And the way they do that is a very clever algorithms. And these algorithms are fed by data. And the more data it's being fed, the smarter they get, right? So it's really important that businesses are starting to look into these startups. Now, the interesting thing is that 10 years ago, when we heard Marc Andreessen speak about software eating the world, those companies were all or mostly based in Silicon Valley in the US. But today, when we look at the top AI startups here by CB Insights, these companies are actually spread around the world, and they're coming out of clusters like London, Berlin, Amsterdam, Singapore, and even from Malaysia, hopefully, over the next coming years. So the question is, like, who are you in this picture, right? Are you the big fish trying to eat the small fish and get them out of business through an acquisition? Or are you one of the small fishes behind trying to disrupt the big guys? Now, don't think that you're always a small fish because you're a small company, but there may be a lot of other small fish behind you that you don't even know about. The question is then, how do I protect myself and how do I ensure that I stay ahead of the game? Now, there's a lot of different strategies or corporate innovation vehicles that you can use. Everything from partnerships to run a corporate venture capital fund, accelerators and innovation labs, right? And you can see here on this graph, which is produced by BCG, like what are the most common vehicles that people use today? And we can see a rise in all of those. Now, it's not, the point I don't want to make here is that you should be using all of these. The important point is that you have a very clear strategy, an objective on why you're using that and what you're trying to achieve. In some way, we've tried out different things, right? We started from partnerships, then we set up an innovation lab, build an accelerator, and now we also have a corporate venture capital arm. It's all about trial and error, and there's no one size fits all. So you need to figure out for your business, whether you're a small SME or a large multinational company, which model works best for you. Now, in terms of venture capital, right, we've seen a rise of corporate venture capital units, which is basically investing from your company into different startups. This is nothing new, right? This has been playing out over the last 20 years or even longer in the US and Europe and other countries. But it's interesting that in Southeast Asia, these trends are really picking up. And today we see more than 60 corporate venture capital funds coming up, right? And Sunway is one of them. Now, what we have done differently than most other players is we took an ecosystem approach. We didn't just say, hey, let's try to make more money under our corporate and let's try to form new businesses. Now, we looked at it and we said, well, what are the important factors, the important ingredients to innovate? And the three important ingredients that we saw is the talent from the university, the corporate with its problem statements and challenges and wanting to innovate, and capital, the venture capital side, right? And we put those three things together to really nourish our ecosystem and to help entrepreneurs to thrive. And don't let you think that this is just a slide to show you like how great we are or anything. We are not perfect by any measure, but we also open up to other ecosystem players. We work with government agencies, we work with startups, we work with VCs, we work with other companies. So we are very open in our approach. And the vision is not just to innovate in Malaysia. I mean, for the European companies out there or other Southeast Asian businesses, we would like to position ourselves as a launchpad into this region, right? Helping you to conquer different countries, not just the Malaysian market, but the entire 620 million people that we see in Southeast Asia. And that's really what excites us. Another thing that excites us a lot is sustainable development. We can talk a lot about technology, innovation, and disruption, but sustainable development and the United Nations SDGs are going to be extremely important. And this is really the DNA of Sunway. We started out more than 40 years ago in this old mining field, which was just a barren land. It's like a moon crater. And today you will see a very thriving and flourishing city with 13 business units, theme park, many students walking around and enjoying their time here in the city.
2 minutes, Matt.
Yes. So this has guided us. And right now, what we are offering in this city is not just the infrastructure, but we're offering the whole city as a living laboratory. It's like a huge test bed where you can run different experiments. We're not running science experiments, but we run business experiments. We allow you to run these experiments within our business units, right? To get access to our mentors, to get access to the capital, and to get access to the sandboxes that we run. Now, the 6 verticals that we are really excited about and that we are zooming into, it's not just 6 verticals because they are very much aligned with what we do, but there's also 6 verticals where we see a lot of growth. So here we go. First one is EduTech. Again, we have about 20,000 or more students in Sunway Education Group. We see that as a huge testbed where we can improve the delivery and consumption of education. Recently, we launched a 42KL coding school that has no teachers, no classrooms, and no tuition fees. We're trying to game change that business model of education. Digital health. Of course, very important, right? How do we prevent lifestyle diseases such as obesity and diabetes using data and technology? E-commerce, and I'm not just talking about selling products or services online, but how do we create a very seamless offline to online experience? Smart cities, so how do we leverage the technology, the infrastructure that we have, and make the customer experience better? We partner up with Huawei and Cellcom to leverage the potential 5G, and we are now trying out different pilots to see how that can create future solutions for our city. FinTech, we're very ambitious to become a digital bank in the future, and we are working with different startups to build up that ecosystem. And finally, and this is something I'm very excited and passionate about, is food and agri-tech. And of course, being a Dutchman and knowing what happened in the Netherlands over the last 20 years, on how they've become the second largest agri producer and exporter in the world just after the United States, is just incredible for such a small country. And this is not just because of the policies they set, it's because of the ecosystems they built. And these build their ecosystems around knowledge centers. In the Netherlands, for example, they build these around Wageningen University, where you don't just see a top university, but you see the startups, SMEs, as well as the multinational companies around there and collaborating with each other. Let me finish off by giving you an example on what we are now passionate about, where we see a huge opportunity. We set up our Future X Farm, which is an urban farm innovation hub that brings together researchers, students, startups, as well as industry. And our ambition is to tackle food security, which is a huge problem in Malaysia. We're still importing about 60 billion ringgit a year from foods from China, Indonesia, India, and other countries. What we've built initially is a pilot where we put urban farms together in underutilized spaces, such as car parks and rooftops. And we're producing vegetables, right? We are creating a farm to fork environment. But it's not just about that. It's not just about producing food. It's about the technology that we embrace as well. At the end of the day, we want to know like where people's food is coming from. We want to predict whether the demand that there is from the market can be met by the supply side. And for that, we are building a data infrastructure that is driven by a lot of data. And we are now also building the tools such as artificial intelligence to make those predictions and hopefully to improve food security in Malaysia. So just finishing off with this is a great example where innovation, sustainability, as well as technology comes together. And I hope it sort of inspires you in the last 10 minutes to do something similar or to collaborate with us on any of these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. And is technology eating the world? Well, with your last slides, you can also show that technology is providing more food to the world. And of course, that's the way to go about, and compliments to you and your team on establishing this. I live nearby. On my walking route every morning during this MCO, I actually pass by right over the farm. And last week I had the pleasure of, for the first time, eating the vegetables that are being grown in the lab, and I can recommend it to all. It tasted very good and fresh. Coming back to AI, what has become obvious to me the last few months, how many new movies and TV shows there are related to artificial intelligence, and also not just the opportunities, but definitely also the dangers of it. Just finished watching the show Next on, I think on AXN or somewhere, I forgot where. So yeah, there's a lot to do about this world, and if you don't watch out for it, the AI will indeed eat the world. All right, thank you, Matt. Fantastic insights. I'm sure our audience has enjoyed this, including the guest of Sunway Group today. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our lineup of speakers. I can see that just about everybody is still online. That's fantastic news. We're going to move into the breakout rooms. Adeline will put those up on the screen at the moment. For those of you working on a laptop, on your bottom row, the panel next to the chat, and that same row, you'll see breakout rooms. You will be able to select one of the speakers there. Just click on join, so that is very easy. If you're on a mobile phone, you can go to your top left of your screen. All right. Just as an intermezzo, yeah, please let me take this opportunity to express our appreciation to the MDBC sponsors this year. Yeah, our 25th anniversary patrons are BASI, HQ Pack, NLM Business, Shell, Signify, and Hibiscus Petroleum. Our premier partners and other support comes from Bolloré, Boskalis, Dutch Lady Milk Industries, Enza Zaden, Maida, Missy, Randstad, Unilever, Actiforce, Basis Bay, Frames, Intermovers, Kelkepong, and Kingsman. Thank you so much for making it possible for MDBC to plan many more activities around our 25th anniversary this year, such as expanding our Connect Fair virtual platform into a virtual MDBC village with a virtual directory with all members included this year, and expansion of our annual awards program and several other activities. Now, please do stay tuned, especially after Chinese New Year. Wishing all of you later on, after your breakout rooms, you will not come back into this main room. So let me make use of this opportunity to wish you a great Chinese New Year break. We look forward to see you again towards the end of February or March, hopefully live, otherwise online or both. And yeah, let's now move into the breakout rooms. The speakers, make sure you press the right button to join, of course, your own breakout room. We have Masni from Maida, the ambassador. We have Nazhif from Vriens and Partners, Jonathan, Standard Chartered Bank, Gerard, Informa Markets, Vijay from Regis, and Matt from Sunway iLabs. And please select one and just have yourself a very nice conversation like you would usually do in a round table breakout after other events that we organize. Yeah, so a great opportunity for you to join people in their own room and have a small conversation with your additional questions that you might have. Earlier, we've seen some questions coming up for Maida. And I think there were some other questions as well, especially on the economic side. So yes, please go ahead. And once you're done with your breakout room, good night. Thank you very much. See you again.
Marco, where exactly is my breakout room?
If you go to the bottom of the screen,
Yeah.
Mr. you on the right
I have
of the
chat,
chat,
I have share screen, I have reactions.
and then breakout room.
No.
There should be a new panel that says breakout room.
Oh, it's not there, Marco.
I'm not seeing it either, Marco.
Same here. I'm not seeing it either.
Nothing on
Yeah, I don't have it as well.
Okay, Evelyn, can you help out here? I see it on my screen. I hope it's not just for the host.
Your reaction.
Only have reaction, record, and chat and participate.
Yeah, it should actually be record between record and reactions.
Please.
Okay. Okay. Let me, Evelyn, can you see if we can help out here? If it's not only for the host, right? It's for everybody. Yeah, we tested this already and then it worked. All right, please give us a moment. Don't go away, ladies and gentlemen.